Welcome to Lyme Time. I'm Allie from the Tick Chicks. We are all more than Lyme disease and chronic illness, and together we stand with you to overcome and rise. I'll bring you closer to the experts in cutting-edge treatments and even a few unexpected ways of healing. I'll ask the questions you want answers to regarding Lyme disease and successful ways of getting you closer to 100%. We are in this together and will not be defined by Lyme. Today, my guest is Dr. Brad Montagne, and he is coming to me from the Carolinas, and I'm so excited to have him here. But I want to tell you a little bit about him first. Dr. Brad struggled with chronic illness, and he began to manage his own condition with diet as a young child. He later learned how to conquer candida and fungal-related digestive problems that had become systemic in himself. And he did the same with Lyme disease, Babesia, and other co-infections when he started to wreak havoc with his own health. Dr. Brad has taken this knowledge in combination with his doctorate and over 35 years of postgraduate studies of functional medicine and clinical experience to help people with the most disabling conditions back to full health. He himself no longer lives with dis-ease, but he enjoys the health that you long for. Using creative diagnostic tools that took decades to develop and refine, he works with you as a whole person with care that fits only you and your specific needs. And this has empowered Dr. Brad to be able to find and address root problems that top clinics and specialists could not find. Every therapy he presents, he has tested on himself first, and many others proving their effectiveness. And this has allowed him to help people like you with lifelong struggles restore them to their optimum health. Dr. Brad, thank you so much for joining us on Lyme Time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to meeting you for quite some time, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Well, likewise. And I remember a few months ago when I wasn't scheduling any podcasts, I said, let's do it in a couple of months. And you said, okay, I'll send you the book. And I said, oh, no, I've already ordered it. So it's sitting right here on my desk. And I'll start with reading the title of your beautiful book. It's called Exposing Lyme and Chronic Illness, Revealing Secrets of All Chronic Illness That Keep You Sick. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about yourself and your own personal journey that led you to writing this book.
My own personal journey is like a lot of other people's. I started getting, well, actually, I woke up when I was about 5 years old with gut-wrenching pain, just all doubled up. Cold sweats, couldn't figure out, had no idea what it was. That was the first of a bunch of trips to the hospital. And it started something that everybody with Lyme disease and chronic illness is really familiar with. You have something, you go to the best place you know of to get it taken care of, and you don't have a lot of decisions at 5 years old, but no one tells you what it is, what's caused it, or how to address it. They may put a name on it and they may calm it down, but no one really tells you how to address that. I started cooking when I was about 5 years old to be able to manage my own health. Mm-hmm. And that started a huge journey of, I've had fungal infections, chronic candida. We had to figure out how to address that because no one figured out what that was when I grew up in a place where I couldn't tell you how many ticks I pulled off myself. It's probably hundreds. Mm-hmm. And I was always out in the woods doing things. I woke up, this is middle age, just with these just intense fevers and sweats. My fevers were like 104 plus and spiking from there. And that's dangerous as an adult. Could not get them down, couldn't do anything. I had some friends threaten that if I didn't go to a medical doctor, they're going to drive 100 miles and drag me in to see one. I hadn't seen one in over 30 years.
No.
I had not had even an aspirin in over 30 years. Went in there, the guy did a cursory thing, never touched me, said he got influenza, told me to quit doing what I was doing, take some ibuprofen. I know people at that time were doing 3 900 milligram ibuprofen 3 times a day. I took one 250 milligram ibuprofen. I got hallucinations. I said, I am not doing this again. I'm just
Wow.
not doing this again. And it took me a while to actually develop some tools to figure out what I had and how to address it. Since that time, we've been working with people with Lyme disease, and actually my specialty is really pretty much been Candida leaky gut, which gave me the tools to be able to work with people with Lyme disease, because Candida leaky gut, I call it the root to almost all illness. Lyme disease is just the king of chronic. If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. Everything's interconnected. And the book that I wrote, it connects all the dots on everything that people struggle with Lyme disease that no one can stick their finger on.
Yeah.
Um, so
I
go ahead.
I found your book extremely easy to follow, extremely comprehensive. I found it easy to read. It's a great sort of handbook, if you will, for all chronic illness, but especially Lyme disease. And you know from firsthand experience, it sounds like you had a lifetime of chronic illness from the time you were 5 years old. And, you know, it's oftentimes, I always say, we are our best expert. You know, nobody can possibly get in our own bodies and understand what's going on when it's a systemic illness.
That's right. When you look at Lyme disease, they are probably the most educated sick people in the world. One of the big problems with that is you have sick people giving counsel and education to other sick people. And what it does, it perpetuates the sickness. It doesn't perpetuate the pathway to get free.
Mhm.
And the common pathways that people use oftentimes make them worse.
Yeah, yeah, or don't affect them at all. They don't eradicate any of the bacteria. They don't address the bacteria that's already infiltrated a lot of tissue and muscle and all of that. It's just kind of their first line defense. And I think it's interesting to note that over 60% of the Lyme disease population really have long chronic Lyme, post-treatment Lyme. And that's really what we're talking about here, and that's who we're talking to here. When I opened up your book, I was really struck with how it sort of starts, and it begins with an overview of Lyme disease and chronic illness, and just sort of talking to people about, you know, what is it? How does it begin? What kind of co-infections actually exist? Because many people that are new to the Lyme community actually don't understand that there are so many different variations of Lyme disease. I always call Lyme disease as an umbrella term for so many other tick-borne illnesses. And you really chart them all out and basically talk to us about the differences between those different strains.
I tried to make it so that people could get answers that you really can't get anywhere else, and that's really the primary focus. What very few people understand is what sets the stage that makes people so that they can't fight off the infection that came in the first place. What beats the immune system up to the point that it doesn't work the way it's supposed to is oftentimes the key to getting them healthy again.
Mm.
And I don't know of hardly anybody, I don't know anybody else that addresses that.
Mm-hmm. And
So
And so now I know that you have a clinic called Healthfully You. And when people come to you and they say, I've just been diagnosed with Lyme disease, or I suspect I have Lyme disease, what would you think in your opinion, is you talk about other root causes that's tripping up the Lyme disease. What's an overall, what are your top three things that are really that you see in your practice that you have to address first?
Okay. Two things. One, most of the people we work with are distance and long distance away. I'm working with people in Europe, all over the country, and many people we don't see in person. So we've figured out a way to do diagnostics at a distance that's more accurate than most prestigious clinics known.
Okay.
So that's saying one thing. When you look at what sets the stage, Lyme disease never comes by itself. It always comes with a host of other things that are as wicked or worse than Lyme disease. In looking at hundreds of cases of people with Lyme disease, I've never seen one case that was not started from a candida infection, systemic candida infection. And
Really?
candida has four different phases to it, or four different forms to it. There's a yeast form. Almost everybody that tries to deal with candida deals with a yeast form. There's a fungal form. That's a more deep-rooted one. There's a fungal parasite. And when you look at a fungal body, you see the little fuzz that comes off of it. There's also a mold form. It has a fuzz too. That fuzz is called mycelia. That's the feeding tubules. The lining of your gut's only one cell layer thick. As soon as those mycelia, the feeding tubules, pierce your gut wall, it becomes a parasite, and those mycelia break off, form a new head, and they float around. They'll go into every tissue in the body. Every single case we've seen of Lyme disease has at least three of those four forms of candida. So all of their guts are a mess. Their elimination is a wreck, which makes them toxic. And that sets the stage for hormonal dysregulation, metabolic dysfunction in every organ system that there is, and creates a host of food intolerances, which the food intolerance testing is only 2 to 3% accurate. So people don't have a hope and a prayer to even figure out where to start.
It's
So I just
incredible.
said a lot.
Yes. Well, I mean, so your take on it is basically an overload of candida starts tripping off the rest of a host of other really bad things. And to get to the root cause, what you're finding is candida sort of at the base of all of this. And in terms of, I think people don't understand. They think, oh, I just got bit by a tick and then I went down, within a month or within a couple of weeks or within a few days. Are you saying that they had a high incidence of candida before the tick bite, or is it just does the Lyme disease just trigger the candida or vice versa?
Generally, they had the candida in the first place. If they've taken antibiotics, that'll absolutely create. There's a lot of ways that can create that. But
Mhm.
it's interesting in working with people, Lyme disease really doesn't take that long to get rid of. It's a matter of weeks. The parasites that are with it, like Babesia, is it depends on which form you have, which strain.
Mhm.
Microtia is, we use probably close to 3 months. Divergence can be 4 or more months. When you deal with all of the tick-borne infections, all the parasites, all of the other things, what's always left that still takes months to clear out is candida. Always.
Yeah, I think you're raising an interesting point that people often they're not even aware of the high candida in their own bodies. I mean, I'm thinking back along all the tests that I've ever been given, and over, I don't know, 9, 10 years now, I don't remember anybody discussing candida with me personally. But I think that this can even be a hereditary thing if you're predisposed to candida. Is that possible?
Uh, when you look at flora, it's a bacterial coating that coats all your mucous membranes. So nose, throat, mouth, ears, throughout the gut, woman's reproductive tract, all have almost identical coating of flora. The bacterial coating is all the microbes that grow inside. A woman's reproductive tract, when an infant is born, they slide down the reproductive tract, their mouth gets drug open, they get inoculated with mom's flora. Rarely is that healthy. It's
Mm.
an amazing thing when we deal with moms before they get pregnant or why they're pregnant, heal their guts up, fix their flora. Their children, we had one mom who actually was killed in her second birth. They killed her in the hospital. A lot of things were mismanaged. Placenta wasn't detached. They they scooped it out. She bled to death and she died in the recovery room for a few seconds. Brought her back, gave her full transfusion. Life was hell, and her husband said, "Man, we're never getting pregnant again." He had two daughters that he thought he was going to raise by himself, and
Mm.
didn't look like he was going to have a wife. When they got pregnant a third time, they called me up, said, "Okay, now we got to deal with the problem that you didn't want to deal with before." We worked with them. She had the absolute model pregnancy. The placenta's form was the best the people doing the ultrasounds had ever seen. The pregnancy was absolutely tremendous. When it came to birth, she had two pushes. The baby came out extremely healthy, with absolutely no issues. She had maybe a tablespoon and a half of bleeding. That was it. I mean, go from dying in the recovery room to that. That's the difference of what it is. And that answers your question.
Mhm.
It's the mom's health that sets that stage. So yes, it's absolutely transferred.
Right, because I have three children, but one of mine was born with like came into the world with high candida levels. And so I was just kind of always curious whether or not it was something that she picked up shortly after birth or if a lot of it is genetic. But it sounds like they get it when they're being born.
There's a
And
big
some may
difference.
get it worse than others.
Yeah, there's a big difference between genetic and familial.
Mhm.
Most of the things that people think are genetic are actually a family heritage from a family lifestyle that sets the stage.
Mhm.
Every gene that we have has 30,000 different ways, potential ways to express itself. How we live determines which ones those are.
And we you talk a lot about the gut brain connection in your book, and I think this is a new concept for a lot of listeners because how could Lyme disease, this thing that they've recently been diagnosed with, possibly be linked to a gut brain now issue? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's really simple. We have four different nervous systems. We've got our central nervous system, which is our brain, spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system connects that to all of our different tissues. We have an enteric nervous system that's inside the gut, and there was a while they thought that was bigger than the central nervous system. And then we have a cardiac nervous system. All those interconnect a lot. All the flora in the gut, the bacterial coating, the microbial coating inside of the gut, it communicates with the gut, it communicates with the nervous system in the gut, and it sends all these signals of all the potential changes that are going to come into the body through the food supply. And it allows everything to set the stage on how to respond to those foods, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent.
So this is kind of an introduction to when a lot of people get diagnosed with Lyme disease and start the onset of symptoms. One of the first things that they realize is happening to them is that their gut is becoming not normal, and they start reacting to foods that they've never had reactions to in their life, and they start panicking and becoming very sad because it becomes very clear very quickly that they can't eat or they shouldn't be eating what they once were in a very quick way. So to those people that are having a hard time letting go of certain dietary lifestyle changes, what would you say to them? I'll take a step backwards, that are still continuing to have symptoms, but they don't quite understand what it means to change the dietary lifestyle.
Okay, two things with that. A lot of people will turn to the lab testing to try and find out what their food allergies are. Those tests are only 2 to 3% accurate. And the reason why, there's so many reactions to the foods that come out of the gut that are not linked directly to the IgE system of, of immunity, that they have no idea what they are, no way to measure them. So that's one of the big problems. We can find out what people's food intolerances are to over 97% accuracy. And we're the only, the kind of testing we use allows us to test what people have in their cupboard, what they can get in their local grocery store, local farmers market, and all that. All the commercial tests are just what they have from commercial supply. So it's a critical issue, but there's a few foods that you absolutely should cut out whenever you get something like this. Um, Sugar is number one. Every pathogen feeds off of sugar. Wheat is another one. 95% of the hard wheat crop is sprayed with Roundup 2 days to 3 weeks before harvest. It's toxic. And we test people in the most organic, cleanest wheat, everybody we see. They just can't handle that either. Corn is another one. Corn is sprayed with atrazine, which is over 10 times worse than Roundup and Roundup 2.
Which if I may interrupt, I couldn't believe the information you had on corn alone and all the different forms that it comes in. And so you think, oh, I'm not eating corn or tortilla chips or something like that, and you think you've got it covered. Think again, because it's in almost everything that we're consuming or the average person is consuming.
Yeah, if it's packaged, it has corn in it. And people don't know this. A lot of the vehicles that they put in medications are corn. There's like 1,100 names for corn. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
So we have sugar, wheat, corn,
sugar and dairy.
and dairy.
The reason why dairy is all dairy feeds off corn in North America. And so it's all dairy has atrazine and Roundup in it. So it's, I mean, you just cut out a huge amount of what people find on the shelf right there. And the thing with the food intolerances and the gut and the responses, that's almost half of the game with getting people with Lyme disease well, literally.
I agree with that. What are your feelings about animal protein with Lyme disease?
It depends. When you look at animal protein that's grass-fed, grass-finished, there's no difference in that than wild game, and it can be really healthy. But the farmers are doing really insane things right now. There's a new herbicide called Grazon they're spraying their fields with. It's so toxic that one dose of Grazon on a field will make the soil unable to grow things for over 2 decades. If anybody takes manure from hay that came off of those fields, it will kill their organic farms, their greenhouses, their soil, manufacturing, all that for over 20 years.
Unreal. Wow. So therein lies the dairy connection. Although I guess, and that's why it wreaks havoc on your system, is because of all the chemicals that have been passed down to the cow and other things. But I wanted to talk a little bit also about your clinic, because in the introduction that I read, we talked a little bit about the fact that you have developed certain treatments, that you've gone through them yourself, that they give you better results oftentimes than uh, Western or allopathic medicine doctors. So, can you talk a little bit about your own clinic and what you have to offer to those patients that are dealing with Lyme disease, mold, hormone problems, adrenal fatigue, infertility, and the list goes on and on?
Yeah, we we're different in what we do, and that can be, it's actually a good thing, but people don't understand so much what we do. I spent a lot of years trying to beat my head against the wall and do things the way that is more common. And the results, when you look at it statistically, are 20 to 25% of the people you can help, not get healthy again, help. And it just, my mind just isn't satisfied with such poor results. There has to be something better, which put me on a huge hunt for ways to do things. I'm kind of a physiology nut. I have always looked at how things work. And going through grad school, I was fascinated with how the body works. And I could write long papers on a lot of subjects about it. And over the course of the years of close to 4 decades of interacting with other doctors, I've never found somebody else who studies how things work. So my own question to those people, I got friends that are the top docs in their part of the country. They don't study it, and they don't understand even that. And I've studied and I've trained with them, and they don't understand what I'm doing. So to explain that in a different way, we try doing what everyone else is doing. I just find it inadequate. So it put me on this huge hunt. You know, I was on that for my own self, but for other people, it's what's missing. That's the real thing. What is missing? The people that aren't getting well, something's missing. What is it? What does it link to? And that typically ties into this complex of everybody wants to pay attention to what the infection is. And that's not the most important thing with Lyme disease. The most important thing is what set the stage so the immune system was so beat up it couldn't fight it off. Our immune systems are designed extremely efficiently. That is oftentimes the real key on what allows people to return to full health. And a lot of people talk about, a lot of clinicians talk about either getting people to a point of remission or to the point where they don't have Lyme disease anymore. We take that a lot farther. We restore people to full health at over 4 times what top clinics can really offer. And the reason why we do that, we look at every single metabolic function that somebody has. You know, instead of just looking at adrenals, 10 different functions in adrenals, instead of looking at liver, there's like 25 different functions inside of the liver, like 50 functions inside of the gut, all your hormonal functions, interactions, how those go about. We have 4 detox organs. There's 2 primary paths of detox. There's phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 has 5 phases. That makes toxins more toxic, and phase 2 makes those add something to them and make them water soluble so you can excrete them. You have to look at what the toxic influx is, what those toxins are, where they're coming from, how to remove those, upregulate elimination so people are eliminated before you can ever touch toxicity. And toxicity is the key to most of your metabolic dysfunctions, autoimmune problems, hormone dysregulation, and all that. So we're looking at a whole person. everything that's going on, and we don't compartmentalize. We we figure out what the root causes are to dysregulate every metabolic function. We figure out a basic way on how to address that. We set that aside. We figure out what their food intolerances are. We set that aside, and then we bring in to how to figure out what all their infective issues are, toxic issues are, and ever parasitic things, all that. Then we bring that back in, figure out what we need to tweak in the first place, and we come up with a custom program that works only for an individual. It's not generic. It's one-on-one, customized to an individual for their needs only. And that changes so many times in the course of care that you have to follow that. A lot of people who work with people, they'll see them like once a month. We see people weekly until they're stabilized. We can get everything working and all that. Then we start to stretch things out to address everything. And when you look at Lyme disease, it's not hard to get rid of. It really isn't when you do the right things. You do the wrong things, you make everything a lot worse. Lyme disease, you can commonly get rid of Lyme disease in close to 6 weeks, eight on the outside. But the parasitic things, Babesia is probably the worst parasite that goes along with Lyme disease. Microtis, a fairly benign one. It doesn't take as long. Divergence is absolutely the worst. It causes red water disease where we used to live. Red water disease went through there. That was divergent, killed a bunch of cattle. And we had a lot of people getting Babesia divergence up there. That takes a minimum of 4 months to clear. Everybody's going to have an H. pylori infection. You've got to deal with that. They've got candida. You have to deal with that. And you have to set the food intolerances are a huge part of it. You've got to figure out what theirs are, and then you adjust that as a heal along the way. So there's this huge dynamic interaction that has to go on to get people back on their feet. And the way that we analyze things, we do that at a distance. We had a 5-year-old girl. She spent 5.5 days in a research hospital. She couldn't walk, couldn't be touched. She just laid there and cried. They said, oh, maybe you should see a rheumatologist. We don't know what's wrong with her. Her sister begged her parents to work with us. They called us up. We filled out some paperwork, did an evaluation late in the afternoon. The next morning, she was out of bed. 3 days later, she's outside. 6 months down the road, she's healthier than she's ever been in her life. And she was over 1,000 miles away. We never saw her face to face. Now, research hospital tied to one of the most prestigious hospitals in the world can't figure it out. And in a matter of 2 hours, we know what's going on, how to address it, and we get changes in hours. That's consistently what we see because of our individual care, not doing anything generic.
That's quite a story. I mean, I believe it. I believe it because when you can do customized testing down to the minutia, which oftentimes they're testing in hospitals for the big guys. I mean, that was my own personal story. My neurologist kept trying to weed out the big things that were, once he weeded out so many of those big things, he basically said, I just had a pain disorder. Okay, so it's not, lupus or MS or, a blah, blah, blah. So it must just be a pain disorder. I'm like, I don't think so. And that's kind of the frustration, as you mentioned, going from specialist to specialist, it just gets extremely frustrating. And I do want to reiterate what you said, which is basically, Lyme disease can be treated. You can be made healthy and oftentimes healthier than you were before. I think it also takes a mentality where you have to switch from everything you've known to be true and expand your mind. And, oftentimes some people are afraid to go into the functional medicine world. They don't know what it is exactly.
And
And I
that
mean,
that
maybe
is
that would be a
absolutely
good question to ask you. How is it different than an allopathic medicine MD that we're used to going to?
okay. I'll give you the real answer. Functional medicine was started by a bunch of clinical nutritional chiropractors in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. They were trying to figure out a way to get some continuing education to do what they were doing because it was so different than everything. They found Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who was a biologist, who came out to do their continuing education. He had the ticket to sign that off. And Jeffrey Bland, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, he openly admits that the chiropractors taught him way more than he taught them, but he had the degree to sign off the ticket. That was the start of functional medicine. Dr. Jeffrey Bland is called the father of functional medicine. The problem that's gone on with that is as it became popular, integrative medicine saw that to go, okay, we're going to adopt those principles. And then the medical institution, mindset came into functional medicine, and they've stolen what allowed the diagnostics to be so creative and the treatments to be so creative and the success to be so high. It's reduced it down to more of a medical level because of what has come into it. And they're using medical diagnostics rather than functional diagnostics. Like you get some lab tests and you'll get a bunch of different tests of liver functions, 4 or 5 tests on liver functions. We test a liver, um, your liver, it builds 80% of your proteins, folds them in 80% of their shape. You can have the same sequence of amino acids in a protein in every species. It folds into a different shape in every species, and those folds, they vibrate at different harmonics in every different species. Your liver does 80% of that, does phase 1 detox, does phase 2 detox. You got 3 other organs that do that also. It produces bile. That's the way the liver excretes its toxicity. That's also how we absorb digest our oils, which those are typically a mess with most people with Lyme disease. They can't digest their oils, which inflames their gut. And that makes it so they can't digest oils and absorb oils, proteins, and minerals. It stores bile, it excretes bile, has immune function. It stores oils, proteins, and carbohydrates. It does all these different functions that you have to know what they are and you have to be able to monitor them. You can't do that through any lab system that's out there. You have to do that a different way, which there's 4 different classic ways of diagnostics. Labs, most people don't realize this. The Lyme labs used to claim over a decade ago 0 to 20% accuracy of what they do. Now IGeneX, the top Lyme lab in the world, just has on their site, our tests are not a diagnosis. There's a lot of reasons for that. Most of the tests use the B31, the Burgdorferi strain of Lyme disease. That's the least likely strain to infect somebody. I've almost taken that out of my test kit. That it's just the least likelihood. I doubt I see Burgdorferi in 10% of the cases with Lyme disease. It probably less than 5.
Wow.
It's really, really low. So that's part of the reason Tom Greer, one of the foremost researchers, talks about the Lyme lab tests. They took, I think it was 167 patients. They did 516 blood draws, carefully labeled those blood draws. They were triple blood draws from every patient, send them to the best Lyme labs in the world. Sometimes one lab got 3 tests, sometimes 3 different labs got 1 blood sample. Of all those 516 samples, no 2 results were the same. He called it an outrage and said these tests should be outlawed. You look at further research out there, 69% of infected children are misdiagnosed. They just miss it. The test accuracy is atrocious. When you look at the Pudentarns, 2 to 3% accurate, most of your lab tests are less than 40% accurate. And that's what people are hanging their hat on. And a lab test leads to looking at some kind of a manual that gives you a protocol. And with it leads to a diagnosis. The diagnosis is only an insurance code to bill an insurance company. It doesn't tell you a cause, effect, or an extent. It doesn't tell you what's going on or how to treat it, just how to bill it to an insurance company. And that blows most people's mind, but that's the reality of the industry. So you have lab tests, then you have electrodiagnostic tests. Those are, they hook you up with some electrical machine, computerized, that does all kinds of different things. It's got a reasonable accuracy, but it can't tell you a cause or extent, and it's not real accurate in treatment protocol. Then you look at dark field microscopy. It's a microscope where you look at live cell blood and you see what's in it. The problem with that, talked to Tom Greer about that. He's a pathologist, I think he passed away from Lyme disease. But the problem with the dark field is you can't tell what species it is. So you see a corkscrew and you say, oh, that's Borrelia. Well, no, that could be syphilis. It could be something benign. You don't know what it is. The only way you can tell what that is to kill it and stain it. And that was a good conversation with Tom Greer as far as that goes. And it was a good interactive back and forth as far as that goes. So, and the other form of testing is muscle testing, which you look at the double-blind studies, 95 to 97% accurate. I stayed away from that because I was too religious for a long time, and I just thought the people were doing it were just too flaky. And I wasted a lot of years doing things because I was just too religious to accept it. When the Lord finally put me in a place where it made it really obvious he wanted me to check this out, I said, okay, I'll do this. And it wasn't the first time I'd done it. I'd gone through a bunch of training and that, but I said, okay, I'm going to go there, but I'm going to go there with this attitude. I'm not going to have an attitude. I'm not going to have any preconceived ideas of anything. I'm going to go there just innocent as a sponge and look at this as just a tool. Guy that I got trained with was the top functional medicine doc in his part of the country. I saw him a few months after that training. It was ongoing training with stuff. And I saw him a few months after that, and he goes, how come you haven't called me? So why would I call you? He says, everybody calls me. Why haven't you called me? So what would I call you for? Well, people have questions. I don't have any questions. You gave me some tools. I know how to use them. I've got a foundation to learn, know how to apply those. And it was months after that, he's asking my staff what I'm doing because we're getting better results faster with less cost than he was. And the last time I saw him at one of his training conferences, I pulled half of his students aside and I taught them a different way to do what he's doing. And at the end of the class, he turned to the guy that organized all this and he goes, this is the best class I've ever had. Over half the class getting the exact same numbers on every function that we've ever had. I've never seen that. But that was because of my interaction with them. And I'm not saying that prideful way. People, like I'm working with a woman. She's got the wrong body mechanics. I asked, "Do you mind if I touch you?" She says, "Oh, sure, go ahead." So I take her hips and I move her into position and pull her body over so her sternum's over her work. And I said, "You have to be balanced." You have to be balanced over your work. Your sternum is your balance point. You've got to have that over your work. And I taught her a different mechanics, and she starts doing that. She starts getting it. Then she goes to work with an instructor, and he says, "Oh, you can't do that." And she's back working with me, and I move her, and she says the instructor said he couldn't do that. And he comes over and he goes, "How's it going over here?" And I looked at him. He's a personal friend of mine, been one for over 40 years. And I go, "Look, you can cheat. You're a moose. She's a woman. She can't. Most of the people here can't cheat because they don't have the bulk you have. They don't have the strength you have. They don't have the finesse know-how you have. So they have to have a different mechanics. And I'm showing people how to use mechanics that's going to work for them. So they're right over the top of their work and they can get real accurate results." And he turned and he looks away and he thinks for a moment, he turns back to the woman and says, "Keep doing what he said."
Mhm.
So
Well, that says a lot right there. I think, it's hard. It might be hard for our listener to understand how they can be in Europe and get that same type of attention and response from you working with you virtually. But it sounds like you get the job done nonetheless.
yeah, what we do virtually is we hook people up electronically. Everything works by electromagnetics, and that's Einstein's theory of relativity. But all your atoms are electromagnetic pumps, and each one of us have these unique electromagnetic fields for who we are, and everything that's in us has those. Every function has those. Every microbe has those, and all that. And what we do is we hook people up to a surrogate, and I test them through somebody else at a distance. We we were moved halfway across the country. And some people who were working with us says, "Can you figure out a way to work with us at a distance?" And once again, it's too religious to think about doing that. But it looked like the Lord's going to move us on. And I finally said, "Okay, I'll try this out. I'll test it out." And we started testing people at further and further and further distances with things. At the end of my testing, I was testing people blindly, not knowing who they were or what they had. They're not saying a word on the other, and do full evaluation, which is hundreds of tests. It's hundreds, literally. And then we brought them in and did the same thing. Guess what the difference in results was?
Nothing?
They were identical, which is statistically impossible.
Wow.
It's absolutely, I mean, you're talking hundreds of tests, all the levels, all the numbers of levels. We rate everything on a scale of 1 to 10. All those were identical, except for one thing. My wife says, "But did you check this?" I checked it and I go, "Okay, you're right. It was identical." And it was a very humbling experience for me.
Mm.
Lord likes to humble people a lot. And to me, I find that humbling in that he honors our integrity with a level of diagnostic skill and effectiveness that's not natural. He's a huge part of what we do. And that's how we work with people distantly. And that 5-year-old girl, that's not an uncommon story with us. I could rattle on for a long period of time of stories like that, of people that have been long-term in the most prestigious medical hospitals and institutions in this country, which are the most prestigious in the world. We've beat their care every time with every patient we've shared for almost 40 years.
I'm a believer, and I'll tell you what, personally, my own personal journey, just to wrap things up, it took me a long time to let go of what I thought was going to cure me. It took me a long time to let go of obsessing about my lab numbers. It took me a long time to release the attachment that I had to killing the bug inside of me. I just had to work on my symptom relief. And to get proper symptom relief, I had to move into the integrative and functional medicine world because I wasn't going to pay top specialists to scratch their heads anymore. I had to try something new. And that's where I opened my mind. And I hope that people can listen to this and really understand that you do have to, and that's where I do think, religion may or may not come in, is the ability to surrender and say, show me another way, because I'm not getting where I want to get through this one thing that my human brain can comprehend, which is the science that I was raised to believe in. So there's a lot to quote unquote medicine. And I find medicine in many, many different forms, shapes, sizes. I find medicine in simple things, and I find medicine in ways that I never thought it was possible. The minute I made that shift in my own life was the minute I started healing myself. Nothing before that was working. So there's nothing that says that we can't try our allopathic medicine in conjunction with a lot of these things. That's perfectly acceptable. And then eventually, I landed with only needing the functional and integrative world. And that is my own personal vote of confidence, and I want you all to hear that. And Dr. Brad, I'm just so grateful that you came here to discuss your book, Exposing Lyme and Chronic Illness. This will be up at thetickchicks.com if you want to make a purchase there. And I want to just tell people where they can contact you. They can email you at drbrad234@gmail.com. Your website is healthfullyu, that's with the letter u.com, healthfullyu.com. And of course on social media, which is on Instagram, healthfullyu, again with the letter u at the end. And the Facebook group is Candida, Lyme, and Chronic Health. Are there any parting words that you'd like to say to our listeners today who are searching for answers and in quite a bit of pain?
The one key thing that I had in writing the book was to try and give people an understanding of the mechanisms of what's going on, because they don't have that. I don't think there's another resource out there that comes close to touching on that. When it comes to treatment things, the supplement world has changed so much. 90% of what we used before COVID hit is no longer clinically effective. We've had to change everything, and as the supply chain gets disrupted, it changes. So to try and nail down on what product or whatever in a generic sense, we don't do that. But the industry is changing so fast, trying to keep up with things, that there's really very little product out there that has any clinical effect. And what works today might not work tomorrow. As soon as the supply chain cuts off a key ingredient, that product is junk again. We're the only doctor in over 200,000 clinicians in all of the warehouses and companies we work with who can figure that out and find out when supplements change their supply chain, when something doesn't work anymore. That's another humbling thing. I've talked to personal friends that are upper management, like vice presidents, their labs, warehouses, their reps. Talk to those people. Some of them take notes so they can share with all their practitioners, because no one else has the kind of information that we have. And it's only because of my own mindset of needing to know how things work. And we've had to test things to such a minutia to get the effects that we have, that it's just the way that we function, we operate. It's not that we're better. It's just that we're not above everybody else. It's just because we function at a different way that it demands us to find those things so we can get the worst people healthy again.
Well, I know so many people out there will be calling and will be asking questions and will be seeking you out in order to feel better, because it takes somebody that has actually walked the path of chronic illness in order to tap into all of the possibilities and everything that each individual needs, and develop a custom program for them. So Dr. Brad is for you. Please don't hesitate. Maybe use this as your sign to reach out to him and learn further. Dr. Brad, thank you so much for sharing your time on Lyme Time.
It's been a real pleasure. I've been looking forward to meeting you for quite some time, and I'll send you a message. Something I thought about just offering to you, since you've been through the struggle. If you're interested, I can do a screen to see any areas where you're still hung up in and that you might need to address. I'll just
Heck
do that
yeah. Heck
for
yeah.
for
I mean,
free.
that would be really fun. And maybe we'll come back later and I'll share some results.
Okay, that'd be good. So I'll send you a couple of forms, fill those out, and then we can talk.
Okay.
And then we can we'll see where you're at, where you're
Okay.
really
Thank
at.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're,
Thank you for that. All
you're
right.
welcome.
I appreciate it. I hope you have a beautiful weekend. And I'll be in touch as to when this is going to air and all sorts of wonderful things for us to help promote it.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks. Take
Have
care.
a great day.
You too.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.